She pressed her youngest daughter against her chest and refused to cry. 5 children. 5 reasons no man would ever want her. Margaret Sinclair stood on that auction platform in the bitter Montana cold, feeling the weight of every pitying glance, every cruel whisper, every shake of the head. But she would not break. Not here. Not in front of them. Then a voice cut through the laughter, rough, quiet, and absolutely certain. "I'll take her. All of them." Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The auction had been going on for 3 hours, and Margaret Sinclair was the last one left. She'd watched 6 other women find matches. The young blonde with the pretty smile had gone to a banker for $300. The German widow with strong hands had fetched $250 from the blacksmith. Even the woman with 2 children had found a taker, some old farmer who needed help with his failing eyesight. But Margaret had 5 children. And, in Montana territory, in the winter of 1879, that made her worthless. "Mama," Sarah Jane whispered, her 12-year-old voice tight with fear. "They're all staring at us." "Let them stare." Margaret kept her spine straight, her chin high. "We've done nothing to be ashamed of." But God, it was hard. Tommy stood rigid beside her, his 10-year-old fists clenched like he wanted to fight every man in that saloon. Emily clung to her skirt, crying silently. Ben had stopped asking when they could eat, and little Grace, 3 years old and burning with fever, hadn't lifted her head from Margaret's shoulder in hours. And finally, gentlemen, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded room. Silas Pemberton was his name, a fat man with a red face and whiskey breath. "We have Mrs. Margaret Sinclair, widow, 32 years of age, can read, write, cook, and sew." He paused. The crowd waited. "She comes with 5 children." The laughter started immediately. 5. Someone hollered from the back. "Hell, I'd pay more not to take that burden. What's she gonna do? Start her own orphanage? Might as well bid on a millstone for your neck." Margaret felt Tommy step forward, his small body trembling with rage. She caught his arm and held him still. "Don't," she breathed. "Don't give them the satisfaction." "But Mama, I said don't." Silas Pemberton cleared his throat uncomfortably. Now, gentlemen, she's a fine, sturdy woman. Good breeding stock. Let's start the bidding at $100. Silence. 75. Nothing. $50. Come on, boys. She ain't bad looking. You can always send the young'uns to work the fields. Margaret closed her eyes. This was it. This was what her life had come to. Standing on a platform like livestock while drunk men decided if she was worth the trouble of feeding. She thought about William. Her husband dead 2 years now, crushed under a falling tree at the lumber camp. She thought about the debts he'd left behind, the landlord who'd thrown them out, her own family, who'd shut the door in her face. "You made your bed, Margaret," her mother had said. "Now lie in it." So she had. She'd sold everything she owned, used the last of her money to buy passage to Montana, answered an advertisement for mail-order brides because it was the only option left. And now she was here. And no one wanted her. $25. Silas was practically begging now. "Anyone? The children are healthy. They can work. The oldest girl already looks capable. That one's got fire in her eyes." A grizzled man near the front said, looking at Sarah, "I'd take her. Just her. $20 for the girl." Margaret's blood went cold. "Absolutely not." Her voice rang out before she could stop it. "My children are not for sale. We stay together or not at all." "Lady, you ain't exactly in a position to be making demands." "My children are not for sale." The grizzled man raised his hands and stepped back. "Fine. Keep 'em all. See if I care." More laughter. More whispers. Margaret felt the last of her hope draining away like water through cracked earth. Well? Silas mopped his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. If there are no bids, I'm afraid Mrs. Sinclair will have to be sent back east or find alternative accommodations. Everyone in that room knew what alternative accommodations meant. There was a house at the end of town with red curtains in the windows. Women went in. They didn't come out. Mama! Emily's voice was tiny. What's going to happen to us? Margaret couldn't answer. For the first time in 2 years, she had nothing left to say. That's when the voice came from the back of the saloon. How much? Every head turned. The crowd parted like water around a stone. He stood in the doorway, a tall figure silhouetted against the gray winter light. Snow dusted his hat and the shoulders of his worn coat. His face was weathered, hardened by sun and wind, and something else. Something that looked like loss. Beg your pardon? Silas squinted at the newcomer. I said how much? The man stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. For the woman and her children, all of them. Well, the bidding starts at... Just tell me a number. Silas looked around desperately as if hoping someone would help him understand what was happening. $100. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out bills and coins with methodical precision, then walked to the front of the room and placed them on the auctioneer's table. $112, he said. That's everything I have. Will it do? Margaret stared at him. Up close, she could see his eyes gray as winter sky, tired but not cruel. His hands were rough with calluses. A working man, a poor man, judging by his patched clothes and the desperate way he'd counted that money. Sir? Silas leaned forward. Do you understand what you're buying 5 children? 5 mouths to feed through winter. That's, I can count. But surely you don't... Is the money enough or not? Silas looked at the pile of bills and coins. He looked at Margaret. He looked at the silent crowd, all of them wondering what kind of fool would spend his last dollar on a woman with 5 children. It's enough. He picked up his pen. Name? Hollister. Jeremiah Hollister. And you understand this is a binding marriage contract. She'll be your legal wife and the children will be my legal children. Yes, I understand. Margaret found her voice. Wait. Jeremiah Hollister looked up at her for the first time. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe of 2 people who'd been broken and were still standing anyway. You don't know me, she said. You don't know anything about us. Why would you... Ma'am. His voice was quiet. Do you want to go to that house with the red curtains? She flinched. No. Do you want your children sleeping in snowdrifts tonight? No. Then sign the papers. He held out the pen. We can figure out the rest later. For a long moment, Margaret didn't move. This was insane. She was about to marry a complete stranger, bind herself and her 5 children to a man she'd met 30 seconds ago. But what choice did she have? She stepped down from the platform, Sarah helping Emily, while Tommy carried Grace. Ben clutched the back of his brother's coat, silent and watchful. Margaret took the pen. My children stay with me, she said. Always. No matter what. Wouldn't have it any other way. And I won't be treated like property. I've had enough of being sold and traded and... Ma'am. Jeremiah Hollister's voice was so tired it hurt to hear. I didn't buy you. I just gave you a way out. What you do with it is up to you. Margaret searched his face for the lie, for the trap, for the hidden cruelty she'd learned to expect from men. She found nothing but exhaustion and something that might have been hope. She signed her name. Margaret Ellen Sinclair Hollister. Well... Silas blew on the ink to dry it. That's that then. You're married. God help you both. The crowd began to disperse, muttering and laughing, already losing interest now that the entertainment was over. Margaret heard their comments anyway. Hollister's finally lost his mind. That ranch of his is barely standing. Now he's got 6 more mouths to feed. Give it a month. She'll be back here looking for another sucker. Jeremiah seemed not to hear them. He picked up a leather satchel from where he'd dropped it by the door and turned to Margaret. You have belongings. She gestured to the single battered trunk that held everything they owned. Their entire lives reduced to one box. That all? That's all. He picked up the trunk like it weighed nothing and headed for the door. Wagon's outside. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch. We should go before the snow gets worse. Margaret gathered her children. Tommy was still glaring at everyone. Sarah had Emily by the hand. Ben was shivering despite the coat he'd long since outgrown. And Grace was so still in Margaret's arms that fear clawed at her heart. Mama. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Is he safe? Margaret looked at the back of Jeremiah Hollister as he walked out into the snow. A stranger. A poor man who'd just spent everything he had on a woman he didn't know. I don't know, she admitted, but he's our only chance. The wagon was old, the horse older. A brown mare with a gray muzzle and patient eyes that seemed to have seen everything twice. Jeremiah helped Margaret up onto the seat, then turned to the children. You 5, get in the back. There's blankets. Cover up and stay warm. Tommy didn't move. Who are you? Tommy. Margaret's voice was sharp. No, Mama. He just bought us like cattle. I want to know who he is. Jeremiah crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. You're right. You deserve to know. He pulled off his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with gray. My name's Jeremiah Hollister. I've got a ranch about 15 miles north of here. 80 acres, 38 head of cattle, and a cabin that's seen better days. Why'd you buy us? Tommy. Let the boy talk. Jeremiah held up a hand. He's looking out for his family. That's good. He turned back to Tommy. Truth is, son, I didn't buy anyone. I made a deal. Your mother gets a home, a roof over your heads, food on the table. And I get... What? Tommy's eyes narrowed. What do you get? Jeremiah was quiet for a moment. Maybe someone to talk to. It's been a long time since that cabin had voices in it besides mine. That's it. You spent everything you had for company. Tommy, that's enough, Margaret said firmly. Mr. Hollister made us a fair offer, and we accepted. Now get in the wagon. Tommy held Jeremiah's gaze for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of respect. Yes, ma'am. He climbed into the wagon bed, helping his sisters up behind him. Sarah settled Emily and Ben under the blankets, while Margaret positioned Grace on her lap, still wrapped in her own shawl. Jeremiah climbed up beside her and took the reins. Ready. Does it matter if we're not? A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. No, I suppose it doesn't. He clicked his tongue, and the old mare started forward into the snow. They rode in silence for the first mile. The town fell away behind them, swallowed by white, and soon there was nothing but open country stretching in every direction. Margaret kept stealing glances at the man beside her. His profile was stern, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He handled the reins with the ease of long practice, adjusting for every drift and rut without seeming to think about it. You're staring, he said without looking at her. I'm trying to figure you out. Not much to figure. I'm a rancher. I work my land. I keep to myself. But you just married a stranger with 5 children. Yes. That doesn't seem like keeping to yourself. Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment. I had a wife once, Ruth. She died 4 years ago. Childbirth. Baby didn't make it either. Margaret felt her breath catch. I'm sorry. After that I stopped caring about much. Ranch went downhill. I went with it. Figured I'd just keep going until I couldn't anymore. So why today? Why us? He finally looked at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes, something that had been buried a long time and was fighting its way back to the surface. Because you didn't break. What? Up there on that platform. They were laughing at you, calling you worthless, treating you like dirt. And you just stood there, back straight, chin up, not crying, not begging. He turned back to the road. I know what that takes. I know how much strength it costs to keep standing when everything's falling apart. Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back hard. I didn't have a choice, she said. My children were watching. There's always a choice. You could have collapsed, could have begged, could have given up. Jeremiah shrugged. You didn't. That means something. From the back of the wagon, Emily's small voice piped up. Mama, I'm cold. Margaret turned to check on her children. Tommy had positioned himself at the back of the wagon, watching the road behind them like a sentinel. Sarah had the younger ones huddled together under the blankets, her arms around them protectively. We're almost there, sweetheart, Margaret called back. She had no idea if that was true. Another hour, Jeremiah said quietly. There's a trading post ahead where we can stop, let the horse rest. Get the young ones something hot to drink. We can't afford. I set aside a little. For emergencies. He glanced at Grace, still limp in Margaret's arms. She's sick. Fever. Started 2 days ago. I don't have medicine, and the doctor in town wanted $3 just to look at her. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. Trading post has remedies. Nothing fancy, but they work. Mr. Hollister? Jeremiah. Or just Jem. Everybody calls me Jem. Jem, then. Margaret took a breath. I need you to understand something. I'm grateful for what you did today. More grateful than I can say. But I won't be a burden. Whatever work needs doing, I'll do it. I'm not afraid of hard labor. I never thought you were. And my children will earn their keep too. Tommy's almost a man. Sarah's been running our household since she was 9. Even the little ones can help with... Mrs. Hollister. Jem's voice was gentle but firm. You don't have to sell me on your family. I already bought in. Remember... Margaret fell silent. Not sure how to respond to kindness she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to accept. They rode on through the falling snow, and she held her feverish daughter close and wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. The trading post was a squat log building with smoke rising from its chimney and a weathered sign that read Harper's General Store and Supplies. 2 horses were tied up outside, their breath steaming in the cold. Stay here, Jem said, climbing down from the wagon. I'll see about that medicine. He disappeared inside before Margaret could protest. Tommy immediately climbed up to the front seat. What do you think, Ma? About what? About him. Hollister, can we trust him? Margaret looked at the closed door of the trading post. I don't know yet, but I know what our options were back in that saloon. At least this way we have a chance. A chance at what? Being his servants, his slaves. He didn't buy us as slaves, Tommy. Then what did he buy us as? It was a question Margaret couldn't answer. She was saved from trying when Jem emerged from the trading post carrying a small bottle and a steaming cup. Willow bark tea, he said, handing the cup up to her. Good for fever. And this, he showed her the bottle, is a tincture, few drops on the tongue every few hours. Old Crow medicine. The Harper woman swears by it. Margaret took the cup and held it to Grace's lips. The little girl stirred, whimpering, but drank a few sips. How much did this cost? Doesn't matter. It matters to me. Jem met her eyes. 50 cents for the tea, dollar for the tincture. I've got enough left for supplies when we get home. He paused. You need to stop keeping score, Mrs. Hollister. We're not trading debts. We're building something, whatever that ends up being. He climbed back onto the wagon seat and picked up the reins. Everyone settled back there. Yes, sir, Sarah called. Then let's keep moving. Storm's getting worse and I want to be home before dark." The home that emerged from the swirling snow an hour later made Margaret's heart sink. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, maybe 3, with a sagging roof and shutters that hung crooked on their hinges. A barn leaned precariously to one side, and the corral fence had gaps where posts had rotted through. Even through the snow, she could see that the whole place had the look of something slowly dying. Jem pulled the wagon to a stop and sat still for a moment, as if seeing his ranch through her eyes and finding it wanting. "It ain't much," he said quietly. "I know that, but it's solid. Keeps the weather out, mostly. It's perfect." He looked at her sharply, suspecting sarcasm. "I mean it." Margaret met his gaze steadily. "It has walls, a roof, a door that can close against the world. That's more than we had this morning." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or the beginning of hope. "Let's get you all inside." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Jem carried the trunk while Margaret carried Grace. Tommy helped his sisters down from the wagon, and they all trudged through the snow to the cabin door. Inside it was cold, but not freezing. The remnants of a fire smoldered in the stone hearth, and Jem immediately set about building it back up. The main room was sparse, a rough table with 2 chairs, a shelf of supplies, a cookstove against one wall. The bedroom door stood open, revealing a simple bed with a patchwork quilt. "Bedroom's yours," Jem said without looking up from the fire. "You and the young ones. I'll sleep out here. This is your home. You shouldn't have to—" "It's my home," he agreed, "and I'm choosing to give you the bed. That's how it's going to be." Tommy was walking around the room examining everything with critical eyes. "Where are we all supposed to sleep? That bed's not big enough for 6 people. "There's a loft." Jem pointed to a ladder against the back wall. "Room up there for a couple of you, and I've got extra blankets. We'll make it work." "We'll make it work," Tommy repeated skeptically. "Just like that. Just like that. Unless you've got a better idea." The boy fell silent, unable to argue with logic. Sarah had found the cook stove and was examining it with professional interest. "Is there food? The little ones haven't eaten since yesterday." Jem's expression tightened with something that might have been shame. "Not much. Some beans, salt pork, a bit of flour. I wasn't expecting." "You weren't expecting 6 extra mouths." Margaret set Grace down on the bed and tucked blankets around her. "It's all right. We're used to making do. Tomorrow I'll ride into town, get proper supplies." "With what money?" The words came out sharper than Margaret intended. She took a breath. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "No, you're right." Jem stood brushing off his hands. "I spent everything I had at that auction. We've got enough to get through a few days, but after that—" He shrugged. "I was planning to sell some cattle before winter. That plan hasn't changed. Just got more urgent." Margaret looked around the cabin at the bare walls, the empty shelves, the man who'd given away everything he had for a woman he didn't know. "I want to see the books," she said. Jem blinked. "What?" "Your accounts, ledgers, whatever records you keep. I want to see them." "Why?" "Because I managed my husband's finances for 8 years. Because I kept a household of 7 running on less money than most people spend on tobacco. Because if we're going to survive this winter, I need to know exactly what we're working with." For a long moment, Jem just stared at her. Then slowly a smile spread across his weathered face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Books are in the chest by the stove," he said. "Such as they are. I'll warn you, I'm not much for record keeping." "Then it's a good thing I am." Margaret crossed the room and opened the chest. Inside was a battered notebook, a stack of receipts and bills, and various papers stuffed in with no apparent organization. She pulled everything out and spread it across the table. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, peering around her mother's elbow. "Figuring out how we're going to live, sweetheart." Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down. "Sarah, see what you can do with those beans." Tommy, help Mr. Hollister with the horses. Ben, keep an eye on your sister. Everyone has a job. Everyone contributes. That's how we survive. She didn't see the way Jem was looking at her with something that might have been wonder or gratitude, or the first stirring of something he'd thought was dead forever. But Sarah saw, and she tucked the observation away, hoping for the first time since her father died, that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. 3 hours later, Margaret had a complete picture of exactly how desperate their situation was. The cabin was quiet now. Sarah had managed to turn the beans and salt pork into something edible, and the younger children had eaten their fill and fallen asleep. Emily and Ben in the loft. Grace in the bedroom with blankets piled high around her. Tommy sat by the fire whittling a stick and pretending not to listen to the adults' conversation. It's bad, isn't it? Jem stood by the window looking out at the snow. It's not good. Margaret set down her pen. You owe $450 to the bank due in 4 months. You have 38 head of cattle that might fetch $20 each at market if you could get them to market, which you can't, because Barrett Blackwood controls the stockyard and sets his own prices. You know about Blackwood. I heard men talking at the auction. He owns half the town, and he's been trying to buy your land for 2 years. Jem turned from his window. My land's got the only creek in the valley that doesn't dry up in summer. He wants the water rights. Been circling like a vulture waiting for me to fail. He won't have to wait long if things keep going the way they are. Margaret tapped the notebook. You've been paying for supplies twice in some cases, losing receipts, missing payments that would have reduced your interest. I told you I wasn't much for record keeping. That's going to change. She met his eyes. If we're going to survive this winter, if we're going to keep this ranch, we need to fight smart. That means knowing exactly where every penny goes. It means finding ways to cut costs and increase income that you haven't thought of. It means being partners, not just whatever we are now. Partners, Jem repeated slowly. Is that acceptable to you? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and held out his hand. Partners. Margaret shook it. His grip was strong, his calluses rough against her palm. From his spot by the fire, Tommy watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. He didn't trust this stranger who'd bought his family like livestock. Didn't trust the kindness that seemed too good to be true. But he'd watched his mother all evening, the way she'd taken charge, the way she'd found purpose in those messy books, the way her shoulders had straightened for the first time since his father died. Maybe he thought grudgingly this wouldn't be the worst thing to ever happen to them. He was wrong, of course. Things were about to get much, much harder. But he didn't know that yet. None of them did. The first week passed in a blur of survival. Margaret learned the rhythm of the ranch quickly, the way the wind howled through cracks in the walls at night, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of floorboards under Jem's boots as he rose before dawn each morning. She learned which pot leaked and which didn't, how to coax the temperamental cook stove into producing heat, and exactly how far their meager supplies could stretch. Grace's fever broke on the 3rd day, thanks to the crow medicine and Margaret's constant vigilance. The little girl was still weak, still too quiet, but her eyes had lost that frightening glaze, and she'd started asking for food again. She's going to be fine, Sarah said, relief evident in her voice as she changed Grace's blankets. Aren't you, Gracie? Want Mama? Grace mumbled. Mama's busy, sweetheart. She's helping Mr. Hollister with the books. Don't like books. Sarah smiled, the first real smile Margaret had seen from her eldest daughter since they'd left Philadelphia. Nobody likes books except Mama. That's why she's special. At the table, Margaret heard the exchange and felt her heart twist. Her children were adapting. Slowly, painfully, but adapting. Even Tommy had stopped glaring at Jem every time he walked into the room. These numbers don't make sense. Jem looked up from the harness he was mending by the fire. Which ones? You paid Morrison's General Store $40 for supplies in October, but according to this receipt, the supplies were only worth $28. Morrison's the only store in town. He charges what he wants. He's cheating you. I know. Jem's voice was flat. But what am I supposed to do about it? Barrett Blackwood owns Morrison's store. He owns most of the stores. You want something in this valley, you pay his prices, or you go without. Margaret set down her pen and turned to face him fully. There has to be another option, another town, another supplier. Silver Creek's 3 days' ride north. By the time you factor in the journey, the prices even out. What about trading directly with other ranchers, cutting out the middleman entirely? Jem was quiet for a moment. Folks around here don't do much trading with each other. Blackwood's made sure of that. Anyone who crosses him finds their cattle mysteriously sick, their fences cut, their wells poisoned. He's done that to you. Not yet. I reckon he figures I'll fail on my own without him lifting a finger. Jem's jaw tightened. He's probably right. No. Margaret's voice was sharp enough to make Tommy look up from his whittling. No, he's not right. We're not going to fail. Ma'am, with all due respect, you've been here a week. You don't know. I know numbers. I know that your ranch isn't as hopeless as you think. I know that if we can get your cattle to a fair market, we can pay off the bank and have enough left over to rebuild. She stood and crossed the room to stand in front of him. I also know that a man who spends his last dollar on a stranger doesn't give up easily. So why are you talking like you've already lost? Jem stared at her. In the firelight, his gray eyes seemed to flicker with something that might have been anger or might have been hope. Because I've been fighting alone for 4 years, he said quietly. And I'm tired. You're not alone anymore. The words hung between them heavier than Margaret had intended. She saw something shift in Jem's expression, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Before either of them could speak again, Ben's voice rang out from the loft. Tommy, look. Tommy was on his feet, instantly crossing to the ladder. What is it? Snow. Real snow. It's coming down so hard I can't see the barn. Margaret moved to the window and felt her stomach drop. Ben wasn't exaggerating. The world outside had vanished into a wall of white snow falling so thick and fast, it was like looking into nothing. Blizzard, Jem said, already reaching for his coat. I need to check on the cattle. In this, you can't even see 10 feet ahead. If I don't get them into the shelter, they'll freeze. He pulled on his gloves. Could lose half the herd in a storm like this. Then I'm coming with you. No. Mr. Hollister. I said no. His voice was hard, but his eyes were something else. Your children need you here. If something happens to me out there, they need to know their mother's safe. Margaret wanted to argue, but she looked at Grace still pale in the bedroom doorway, at Emily clutching Sarah's hand, at Ben, peering down from the loft with wide eyes. Be careful, she said instead. Jem nodded once and opened the door. The wind hit him like a fist, driving snow into the cabin in a horizontal sheet. He stepped out into the white and was gone. Margaret forced the door closed against the gale and turned to find 5 pairs of eyes watching her. Is he going to be all right? Emily asked in a small voice. Yes, sweetheart. He knows this land. He'll be fine. But as the hours stretched on and the storm showed no sign of letting up, Margaret's confidence began to waver. Tommy stationed himself by the window, watching for any sign of Jem's return. Sarah kept the fire burning high and put water on to boil. Emily and Ben huddled together in the loft, and Grace fell asleep in Margaret's arms. 1 hour passed, then 2. Mama. Tommy's voice was tight. Mama, it's been too long. I know. Someone should go look for him. Tommy, no. I won't lose you too. You won't lose. Tommy stopped staring at her. You think he's dead? I don't know. Margaret's voice cracked. I don't know anything. I've been here a week and I don't know this land. I don't know the weather. I don't know. The door burst open. Jem stumbled in, covered in snow from head to foot, half dragging something behind him. No, not something. Someone. A man. Native American Margaret realized, with long dark hair matted with ice and a face gone gray with cold. "Help me," Jem gasped. "Found him by the north fence. He's been out there for hours." Tommy was there in an instant, helping lower the unconscious man to the floor. Sarah ran for blankets. Margaret transferred Grace to Emily's arms and knelt beside the stranger, pressing her fingers to his throat. "He's alive. Barely. We need to get him warm." "I know him." Jem was stripping off his frozen coat, his movements jerky. "Sam Bluefeather. Works the Miller Ranch. Good man. Don't know what he was doing out in this." They worked together without speaking, wrapping Sam in blankets, positioning him near the fire, forcing warm water between his blue lips. Margaret found herself moving in perfect synchronization with Jem, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. "His hands," she said. "The fingers are white. If we don't get the blood flowing—" "I know. Here." Jem took Sam's hands between his own and began rubbing vigorously. "Come on, Sam. Don't you dare die in my cabin." An hour later, Sam's color had improved and his breathing had steadied. He still hadn't woken, but he was no longer slipping away. Margaret sat back on her heels, exhausted. "He's going to make it." "Thanks to you." Jem's voice was rough. "I wouldn't have known what to do with his hands. My husband's cousin lost 3 fingers to frostbite. I learned what to watch for." They sat in silence for a moment, the storm still raging outside, the fire crackling between them. "Thank you," Jem said suddenly. "For what?" "For not giving up. For knowing what to do. For—" He stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily. "I've been alone a long time. I forgot what it's like to have someone fighting beside me." Margaret looked at this man, this stranger who'd bought her for $100, who'd ridden into a blizzard to save his cattle, who'd carried a dying man through the snow rather than leave him behind. "You're not alone anymore," she said again. "I meant it before. I mean it now." Something passed between them in that moment. Not love. It was too soon for love. But understanding, maybe. Recognition. The beginning of trust. Tommy saw it from his spot by the window. He saw the way his mother's shoulders relaxed, the way Jem's hard edges seemed to soften. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe this arrangement wasn't as terrible as he'd feared. Sam Bluefeather woke the next morning. He opened his eyes slowly, confusion clouding his weathered features as he took in the unfamiliar cabin, the fire, the faces watching him. "Where?" "You're safe." Jem crouched beside him. "You're in my cabin. I found you in the storm last night." Sam's eyes focused on Jem and recognition flickered. "Hollister. The hermit rancher." "That's me." "You saved my life." "Don't read too much into it. I just didn't want a body on my property." Sam's cracked lips curved into a ghost of a smile. "Liar." He tried to sit up and winced. "My hands?" "You've got frostbite, but you'll keep your fingers thanks to her." Jem nodded toward Margaret. Sam turned his head and took in Margaret and the children for the first time. His eyebrows rose. "You have a family now." "It's complicated." "Isn't it always?" Sam looked at Margaret with dark, assessing eyes. "Thank you. For my hands." "You're welcome. Try to rest. You need to let your body heal." "Can't rest. I was on my way to warn the Valley Ranches." "Warn them about what?" Sam's expression hardened. "Blackwood's making his move. He's been buying up debts all winter. Come spring, he's going to call them all due at once. Foreclose on everyone who can't pay." Jem went still. Everyone. Everyone. Miller's Ranch, the Santos place, the Thompson homestead, and yours, Hollister. He's been especially interested in yours. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. "He can't do that. The bank—" "Blackwood owns the bank, has for 3 months. He made some deal with Worthington, and now he holds every mortgage in the valley." The cabin fell silent, except for the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the still raging storm. 4 months? Jem said quietly. I have 4 months to pay off my loan. You have until whenever Blackwood decides to call it in. Could be 4 months. Could be 4 weeks. Sam struggled to sit up again, and this time Margaret helped him. I was trying to reach the other ranchers, let them know what's coming. See if we could organize something, fight back somehow. Fight back against Blackwood with what? I don't know. But doing nothing means losing everything. Jem stood and walked to the window. The storm had finally begun to ease, the snow falling less frantically now. But the world outside was buried, drifts piled higher than a man's head, the barn barely visible as a dark shape against the white. How many ranchers are we talking about? Margaret asked. Sam looked at her curiously. 7 families besides Hollister. Maybe 40 people total. And how much do they owe collectively? I don't have exact numbers. Then get them. When you're well enough to travel, go to each ranch and find out exactly what everyone owes. Every dollar, every deadline, every term of every loan. Jem turned from the window. What are you thinking? Margaret's mind was already racing, possibilities and calculations spinning together like threads on a loom. I'm thinking that Blackwood is counting on everyone being too scared and too isolated to work together. I'm thinking that 8 ranches are stronger than 1. I'm thinking that if we pool our resources, share our knowledge, coordinate our sales, we might have a chance. Jem finished slowly. More than a chance. We might actually win. Sam was staring at her with something like wonder. Who are you? Margaret Hollister. And I'm very good with numbers. The storm blew itself out by nightfall, leaving the valley buried under 4 feet of snow. It took 3 days to dig out enough to reach the barn, and another 2 before anyone could travel. But those 5 days changed everything. Sam Bluefeather stayed with them while he recovered, and his presence shifted the dynamics of the household in unexpected ways. He told stories by the fire at night, tales of his people of the land before the white settlers came, of spirits that lived in the mountains and watched over those who respected them. The children were fascinated. Even Tommy, who'd been suspicious of everyone and everything since his father's death, found himself drawn in by Sam's quiet wisdom. You don't trust easily, Sam observed one evening when Tommy was helping him exercise his healing hands. That's smart. The world will hurt you if you let it. My father trusted people. He's dead. And you think if he'd trusted less, he'd still be alive? Tommy's jaw tightened. I think he trusted the logging company to care about safety. They didn't. Tree came down wrong. Crushed him. I'm sorry for your loss. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring him back. Sam was quiet for a moment. Your mother trusts Hollister. My mother was desperate. She didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. She chose to hope. That's different from desperation. Is it? Hope sees possibility. Desperation sees only survival. Sam flexed his fingers carefully. Your mother sees possibility here. I think she might be right. Tommy looked across the cabin to where his mother sat at the table with Jem, their heads bent together over the ledgers she'd reorganized, voices low as they discussed numbers and plans. He's not my father, Tommy said stubbornly. No, he's not. But maybe he could be something else, something new. Like what? Sam smiled. That's for you to decide. On the 6th day, Sam was well enough to leave. He stood at the door of the cabin wrapped in a coat Jem had insisted he take, and looked at the family who'd saved his life. I'll get those numbers for you, he told Margaret. Every ranch, every debt. And I'll tell them about your plan. By the time the snow melts, you'll have allies. Thank you, Sam. He nodded, then turned to Jem. You chose well, Hollister. She's got more fight in her than half the men in this territory. I'm starting to realize that. Sam whistled, and a horse appeared from the direction of the barn. His own mount, which Jem had found wandering near the property during a supply run and had been caring for since. "I'll be back before spring," Sam said, swinging into the saddle. "We'll fight this together, all of us." He rode away into the white wilderness, and Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Margaret's life, but also somehow the best. There was so much work to do, mending fences, caring for cattle, chopping firewood, cooking meals, keeping 5 children fed and warm and healthy in the brutal Montana winter. Some days she collapsed into bed so exhausted she was asleep before her head hit the pillow. But she wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. Jem taught Tommy how to care for the cattle, how to check for signs of illness, how to break ice on the water trough so the animals could drink. The boy resisted at first, but something about the physical work appealed to him, and gradually his hostility began to thaw. "You're good with them," Jem said one afternoon, watching Tommy calm a nervous heifer with patient hands. "Pa used to take me to the stockyard in Philadelphia before—" Tommy stopped his expression, closing off. "Before he died." "Yeah." Jem was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew." "I'm not trying to replace him." Tommy's head snapped up. "What?" "I see how you look at me sometimes, like I'm trying to take something from you. I'm not." Jem leaned against the fence, his eyes on the cattle. "My own father died when I was about your age. Fever took him and my mother both in the same winter. I know what it's like to feel like no one can fill that hole." "So why did you marry my mother?" "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out." Jem turned to look at the boy directly. "But I know this much: she's the strongest woman I've ever met. And you kids, you're tough. You've been through hell and you're still standing. That's not nothing." Tommy didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was gruff. "She's not usually like this. Back in Philadelphia, she was always tired, always worried. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. And now," Tommy considered, "now she smiles for real sometimes. When she's figuring out your books, or when she's got a plan for something. She likes having plans. I've noticed. Just don't hurt her. Don't make her regret trusting you." Jem held the boy's gaze steadily. "I won't." It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. Inside the cabin, Margaret was having her own battles. Grace had recovered from her fever, but she remained clingy and frightened, refusing to let Margaret out of her sight. Emily cried herself to sleep most nights, mourning for the father she barely remembered. Ben had nightmares that woke the whole household. "Mama." Sarah found her one evening slumped at the table after everyone else had gone to bed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "You're always tired now." Sarah sat down across from her mother. "Are we going to be okay here?" "Of course we are." "Mama, I'm 12. I'm not a baby. I can tell when you're lying." Margaret looked at her eldest daughter, this serious, capable girl who'd grown up too fast, who'd been carrying the weight of the family alongside her mother for years. "I don't know if we're going to be okay," she admitted. "There's a man named Blackwood who wants to take this ranch. We owe money to the bank that we might not be able to pay. The winter's harsh, and we don't have enough supplies, and—" She stopped, surprised to find tears on her cheeks. "I'm scared, Sarah. I'm terrified. But I have to keep going because all of you are counting on me." Sarah reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "You don't have to pretend with me. You never did. I'm your mother. I'm supposed to protect you, not burden you with—" "You protect us by being honest, by letting us help." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Mr. Hollister isn't so bad, you know. He's trying. And I think he cares about you. Really cares." Margaret wiped her eyes. "It's only been a few weeks. Sometimes you don't need long to know something's real." The wisdom in her daughter's voice made Margaret's heart ache. When had Sarah become so grown up? When had the little girl who used to bring her wildflowers turned into this young woman who understood things that even Margaret was afraid to see? "When did you get so smart?" she asked. Sarah smiled. "I learned from watching you." Christmas came quietly. There was no money for presents, no feast to be had. But Jem cut down a small pine tree, and the children decorated it with scraps of ribbon and paper stars that Margaret taught them to fold. Sarah made a dinner of beans and salt pork that somehow tasted better than any holiday meal Margaret could remember. "This is nice," Emily said, her small face lit by candlelight. "It feels like a real family." No one knew quite how to respond to that, but Margaret saw Jem's expression soften, saw something vulnerable flash in his gray eyes before he looked away. "I have something," he said gruffly. He disappeared into the bedroom and emerged with a cloth-wrapped bundle. "It's not much, but I made them. Before I knew I'd have anyone to give them to." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal 5 small wooden figures: a horse, a cow, a bird, a cat, and a dog. Each one was carved with careful detail, polished smooth by patient hands. "They're beautiful," Sarah breathed. "Take your pick, one for each of you." Grace reached for the cat immediately. Ben grabbed the horse. Emily chose the bird, and Sarah took the dog with gentle reverence. Only Tommy hesitated. He looked at the remaining cow, then at Jem, then back at the carving. "You made these yourself?" "In the evenings. Gives my hand something to do." Tommy picked up the cow, slowly turning it over in his hands. The craftsmanship was remarkable, every detail perfect, every line smooth. "My father used to whittle," Tommy said quietly. "He wasn't very good at it. Always said his hands were better with an axe than a knife." "Sounds like a practical man." "He was." Tommy looked up. "Thank you. For the cow." "You're welcome." It was the first time Tommy had thanked Jem for anything. Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes and quickly looked away. But then Ben started coughing. At first, Margaret thought nothing of it. Children coughed all the time in winter. She gave him water, checked his forehead, and sent him up to the loft to sleep. By morning, he was burning with fever. "No." Margaret pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the terrifying heat radiating off him. "No, no, no, not again." "Mama." Ben's voice was thin, thready. "Mama, I can't breathe good." "Shh, baby. You're going to be fine. You're going to be just fine." But she could hear it, the rattle in his chest, the wheeze with every breath. She'd heard that sound before in Philadelphia, when the lung fever had swept through the tenements and taken so many. "Jem." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Jem." He was at her side in an instant. "What's wrong?" "Ben, he has the fever. But it's not like Grace's lungs." Jem pressed his ear to the boy's chest and went pale. "That's not good." "I know." Margaret was already moving, grabbing blankets, heating water. "I know. We need a doctor. Real medicine. The willow bark won't be enough. The tincture won't be enough. Nearest doctor's in Silver Creek, 3 days' ride." "Then you have to go." Jem looked at her, then at Ben, then at the window where another storm was building on the horizon. "Margaret." "I know." Her voice broke. "I know it's dangerous. I know I'm asking you to risk your life. But he's my son. He's my little boy. And if he dies because I didn't do everything possible, I'll go." She stared at him. "I'll go," he repeated. "I'll ride through the night, get the doctor, bring him back. 2 days if I push hard." "You could die out there." "I could." He was already pulling on his coat. "But that boy's not going to die, not if I can help it." "Jem." He stopped at the door and looked back at her. "I made a deal with you at that auction. I said I'd give you a home, a roof, food on the table. But this is different. This isn't about deals." He paused. "Somewhere in the past few weeks those kids became something to me. I don't have a word for it, but I'm not going to watch one of them die without a fight." Margaret crossed the room and took his face in her hands. "Come back to us. Promise me." "I promise. And bring my son the medicine he needs." "I will." She kissed him then. Quick, desperate, not thinking about what it meant or what it would change. Just needing him to know, needing herself to know that this was real, that they were real, that whatever happened next, they'd face it together. Jem looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled open the door and disappeared into the gathering storm. Margaret turned back to her son, to the battle that would consume the next 2 days, and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. The hours blurred together. Ben's fever climbed. His breathing grew more labored. Margaret sat beside him through the endless night, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, forcing water between his cracked lips, talking to him constantly, even when he couldn't respond. "Remember when we lived in the house on Maple Street?" she whispered. "Remember the garden out back? You used to catch frogs in the pond. You'd bring them inside and put them in my sewing basket. I'd scream and you'd laugh so hard you couldn't stand up." Ben's eyelids fluttered. "Frogs," he mumbled. "That's right, baby. Frogs. You loved those frogs. Miss the frogs." I know you do." Margaret's voice broke. "But you have to stay with me now. You have to fight. Can you do that? Can you fight for Mama?" "Tired, Mama." I know you're tired, but I need you to keep trying. Just a little longer." Sarah appeared at her elbow with a cup of broth. "Try to get him to drink this. He can barely swallow. Try anyway." Margaret coaxed the broth into Ben's mouth, drop by drop, watching for any sign of improvement. There was none. Tommy came down from the loft where he'd been keeping watch. "Storm's getting worse. Is there any sign of Mr. Hollister?" "No." Margaret closed her eyes. "He'll come back. He promised." "Ma, it's been almost 2 days. If the storm—" "He'll come back." Tommy looked at his brother's pale face, at his mother's exhausted eyes, and made a decision. "I'm going to the barn to check on the animals. If he comes back, he'll need fresh horses ready." "Tommy." "I'm not a child anymore, Ma. Let me help." She wanted to argue, wanted to keep him safe inside, away from the brutal cold, away from any danger. But she saw the determination in his eyes, the same determination she saw in the mirror every morning. "Be careful." "I will." He went, and Margaret turned back to Ben, and the endless vigil continued. On the second night, Ben stopped breathing. Just for a moment, a terrifying eternal moment, his chest went still, his lips turned blue, and Margaret felt her entire world collapse. "No." She shook him harder than she should have. "No, Ben, breathe. Breathe." She tilted his head back, cleared his airway, breathed into his mouth the way she'd seen a doctor do once in Philadelphia. Once, twice, 3 times. Ben coughed, gasped, started breathing again. Margaret collapsed against the bed, sobbing with relief and terror, her whole body shaking. "Mama?" Grace's small voice came from the doorway. "Is Benny going to die?" "No." Margaret wiped her eyes and forced herself to stand. "No, sweetheart. Benny's going to be fine. We just have to keep fighting." But she didn't know how much longer they could fight. She didn't know how much longer Ben could hold on. And she didn't know if Jem was ever coming back. Dawn came pale and cold. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world buried in fresh snow and terrible silence. Margaret had dozed off, sitting up her head, resting on the edge of Ben's bed. She woke to the sound of hoofbeats. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then she heard Tommy's voice shouting from outside. "Mama, he's back! Mr. Hollister's back!" She was on her feet and running before she was fully awake, throwing open the cabin door to see Jem dismounting from an exhausted horse. Behind him was another rider, an older man with a black bag. "The doctor," Jem said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "I brought the doctor." Margaret burst into tears. The doctor's name was Nathaniel Cross. He was a thin, weathered man in his 60s, with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much death to waste time on pleasantries. "How long has he been like this?" he asked, already kneeling beside Ben's bed. 2 days. The fever started suddenly, then his breathing. I can hear it. Dr. Cross pressed his ear to Ben's chest, listening with grim concentration. Pneumonia. Both lungs from the sound of it. Can you save him? The doctor didn't answer immediately. He opened his black bag and pulled out bottles, instruments. Things Margaret didn't recognize. I need hot water, clean cloths, and everyone except the mother needs to leave. Sarah gathered the younger children and herded them toward the loft. Tommy hesitated at the ladder. Go, Margaret said. Take care of your sisters. But, Tommy, please. He went. Jem stood in the doorway, swaying with exhaustion. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes stiff with frozen sweat. He'd ridden through a blizzard for 2 days straight, and he looked like he might collapse at any moment. You too, Dr. Cross said without looking up. You'll be no use to anyone if you fall over dead. I'm fine. You're not. Sit down before you fall down. Jem made it to a chair by the fire and sank into it heavily. His eyes stayed fixed on Ben's still form. Margaret brought the water and cloths, then stood back while Dr. Cross worked. She watched him pour medicine down Ben's throat, apply poultices to his chest, do things with instruments she didn't understand. He stopped breathing last night, she said quietly. Just for a moment. I thought, you brought him back. I breathed for him, like I saw a doctor do once. Dr. Cross looked at her with new respect. That probably saved his life. Not many people would have known to do that. Will he live? The doctor was silent for a long moment. I don't know. The next few hours will tell us. If the fever breaks before dawn, he has a chance. If it doesn't. He didn't finish the sentence. Margaret nodded once and sat down beside her son's bed. She took his small hand in hers and began to pray. The night stretched on endlessly. Dr. Cross did everything he could, then settled into a chair to watch and wait. Jem dozed fitfully by the fire, jerking awake every few minutes to check on Ben. Sarah crept down from the loft around midnight and sat beside her mother, not speaking, just being there. You should sleep, Margaret whispered. So should you. I can't. Neither can I. They sat together, mother and daughter, watching Ben's chest rise and fall with each labored breath. Around 3 a.m, Tommy appeared at the foot of the bed. How is he? The same. Tommy stood there awkwardly, his hands shoved in his pockets. I've been thinking. About what? About Pa. About how he died. Tommy's voice was rough. I was so angry for so long. Angry at the logging company. Angry at God. Angry at everyone. I thought if I stayed angry enough it would protect me from ever hurting that way again. Margaret reached out and took his hand. And now? Now I'm watching my little brother fight for his life, and I realize anger doesn't protect anything. It just makes you lonely. Tommy, let me finish. He took a shaky breath. Mr. Hollister, Jem. He rode through a blizzard for 2 days to save Ben. He could have died out there. He almost did die out there from the look of him. Tommy glanced at the man dozing by the fire. Pa would have done the same thing. That's what good men do. They risk themselves for the people they care about. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe I've been wrong about him. Maybe... Tommy's voice cracked. Maybe it's okay to let him in. Maybe it doesn't mean I'm betraying Pa. Margaret pulled her son close and held him tight. Your father would be so proud of you. You know that, don't you? I miss him. I know, baby. I miss him too. They held each other in the darkness, and for the first time since William's death, Tommy let himself cry. Dawn came slowly, painting the cabin in shades of gray and gold. Margaret had fallen asleep, sitting up, her head resting on the edge of Ben's bed. She woke to a hand on her shoulder and found Dr. Cross looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Mrs. Hollister." Her heart stopped. "No, no, please." His fever broke. It took a moment for the words to penetrate. "What?" "About an hour ago." His fever broke and his breathing is easier. "He's going to make it." Margaret looked at her son. His face was still pale, still too thin, but the terrible flush was gone from his cheeks. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, no longer rattling with every breath. "Ben." She touched his forehead. Cool. Blessedly, miraculously cool. "Ben, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. "Mama." "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." "I had the strangest dream. There were frogs everywhere, and Pa was there, and he said—" Ben's brow furrowed. "He said I had to go back, that you needed me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "He was right. I do need you. We all need you." "I'm hungry." A laugh escaped her, half sob, half relief. "Sarah, Sarah, wake up, your brother wants breakfast." The next few hours were chaos of the best kind. Sarah made porridge while Tommy helped Ben sit up. Emily and Grace crowded around the bed, touching their brother as if to make sure he was real. Even little Grace seemed to understand that something wonderful had happened. "Benny's not going to heaven?" she asked, her small face serious. "Not today, sweetheart. Not for a long, long time." Jem hung back, watching the family reunion with an expression Margaret couldn't quite read. She crossed the room to stand beside him. "Thank you. Just did what needed doing. You rode through a blizzard. You nearly killed yourself getting that doctor here. That's not just what needed doing. That's—" She stopped, struggling for words. "What?" "That's what family does." Jem went very still. "Family. You saved my son's life. You've given us a home, a chance at a future. You've been more of a father to my children in 2 months than most men would be in a lifetime." Margaret took his hand. "Whatever this arrangement started as, it's not that anymore. At least not to me." "Margaret, I know it's complicated. I know we barely know each other. But I think—" She took a breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Jeremiah Hollister. And I need to know if that scares you." He was quiet for so long she was afraid she'd made a terrible mistake. Then his rough hand came up to cup her face, and he looked at her with eyes that held something she'd never expected to see. "It terrifies me," he said quietly. "I swore I'd never let anyone close again. After Ruth died, I built walls so high I couldn't even see over them anymore. And now I've got 5 children in my cabin and a woman who makes me feel things I thought were dead forever." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You asked if it scares me. It does, but not as much as the thought of losing you." He kissed her then, not quick and desperate like before, but slow and careful, a promise made without words. From across the room, Tommy watched, and for the first time since his father died, he smiled. Dr. Cross stayed for 3 more days, making sure Ben's recovery was complete before making the long journey back to Silver Creek. On his last morning, he pulled Margaret aside. "Your boy is strong. He'll make a full recovery, but he needs rest. Real rest. No running around in the cold for at least a month. I'll make sure of it. There's something else." The doctor's expression grew serious. "I've been hearing things on my rounds. About a man named Blackwood." Margaret's stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" "He's been buying up debts all winter. Mortgages, loans, even IOUs from the general store. Word is he's planning to call them all due at once come spring." "We know. Sam Bluefeather told us." "Then you know he's targeting your husband specifically. That water on your land, it's the key to controlling the whole valley. Blackwood won't stop until he has it." "What do you suggest we do?" Dr. Cross shook his head. "I'm a doctor, not a businessman. But if I were you, I'd start building alliances. One ranch can't stand against Blackwood. 8 ranches together might have a chance." That's exactly what we're planning. Good. He picked up his bag. I'll be back in a month to check on the boy. Try not to get into too much trouble before then. But trouble, it seemed, was already on its way. Sam Blue Feather returned 2 weeks later with news that made Margaret's blood run cold. "Blackwood's moving faster than we thought," he said, warming his hands by the fire. "He called in the Thompson mortgage yesterday, gave them 48 hours to pay in full or get out." "Can they pay?" "No, nobody can pay that kind of money that fast. That's the whole point." Jem paced the length of the cabin. "How much do they owe?" $300. They've got maybe 50 in savings. And the other ranchers? Same story. Miller owes 400. Santos owes 250. Everyone's in the same bind. Sam looked at Margaret. "I got the numbers you asked for. Every debt in the valley, every dollar, every deadline. It's not pretty." Margaret took the papers he offered and spread them across the table. The picture that emerged was devastating. Blackwood had been patient, calculating buying up debts strategically to maximize his leverage. When he made his move, no one would be able to resist. "We have to stop him," she said. "How?" Jem's voice was bitter. "He's got the law on his side. Those debts are legal. He has every right to collect them." "Maybe. But he doesn't have the right to destroy people's lives for his own greed." Margaret looked at the papers again, her mind racing. How did the Thompsons borrow that money in the first place? Sam checked his notes. Worthington at the bank, same as everyone else. And Blackwood bought the debt from Worthington. That's right. Was there a proper transfer of the mortgage paperwork filed with the territorial office? Sam and Jem exchanged glances. "I don't know," Sam admitted. "Why?" "Because if there wasn't, if Blackwood just paid Worthington under the table without following proper legal procedures, the transfer might not be valid. The original terms of the loan might still apply." Jem stared at her. "You think he cut corners?" "I think a man who's trying to steal an entire valley probably didn't worry too much about paperwork." Margaret gathered the documents. "I need to see the original mortgages, every single one. If there's an irregularity, we might be able to buy time." "Where are you going to find a lawyer to help with this?" Sam asked. "The only lawyer in town is Blackwood's man." "We don't need a lawyer. We need evidence." Margaret looked at Jem. "And we need to move fast. How long until Thompson's deadline?" "Tomorrow morning." "Then we ride now." Jem caught her arm. "Wait. You want to ride to Thompson's place in the middle of winter, dig through their legal papers, and somehow find a way to stop Blackwood all by tomorrow morning?" "Yes." "That's crazy." "Do you have a better idea?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he grabbed his coat. "Sam, you stay here with the children. Margaret, let's go." The ride to Thompson's ranch took 2 hours through deep snow. By the time they arrived, Margaret's hands were numb and her legs ached from riding, but her mind was clear and focused. Henry Thompson was a tired man in his 50s with a wife and 3 grown sons. He met them at the door with a shotgun. "What do you want, Hollister?" "We're here to help." "Help!" Thompson laughed bitterly. "Nobody can help. Blackwood's got me by the throat, and there's not a damn thing anyone can do about it." "Maybe there is." Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, I need to see your mortgage papers. The original documents from when you took out the loan." "Why?" "Because I think Blackwood may have made a mistake. And if he did, we might be able to stop him." Thompson studied her for a long moment. Then he lowered the shotgun. "Come inside." An hour later, Margaret found what she was looking for. "Here." She pointed to a paragraph buried in legal language. The original mortgage specifically states that the loan can only be transferred to another party with the written consent of the borrower. Look, your signature is supposed to appear on any transfer document. Thompson leaned in. "I never signed anything. Worthington just told me the bank had been sold and someone else owned my debt now." "Exactly. Without your signature, the transfer isn't valid. Blackwood doesn't actually own your mortgage. Worthington still does. But Worthington sold to Blackwood. He tried to, but he didn't follow the proper legal procedure. Margaret felt triumph rising in her chest. Blackwood can't foreclose on a debt he doesn't legally own. Thompson's wife Martha spoke up from the corner. Will that hold up in court? It should. The territorial law is clear on this. Mortgage transfers require borrower consent. Margaret gathered the papers. But we need to move fast. If Blackwood shows up tomorrow to take your property, you need to be ready to fight. Fight how he'll bring men with guns. And you'll have something better. The law. Margaret looked at Jem. We need to check the other mortgages. If Blackwood made the same mistake with everyone, then he doesn't own any of the debts, Jem finished. The whole thing falls apart. Exactly. They rode through the night, stopping at ranch after ranch, digging through paper after paper. By dawn, they had checked 4 of the 7 threatened properties, and every single mortgage had the same clause. Every single transfer had been done without the borrower's consent. Blackwood had been so confident in his power that he hadn't bothered to follow the rules, and that was going to be his downfall. The confrontation came 3 days later. Margaret stood on the porch of the Thompson Ranch, surrounded by 7 families, every rancher Blackwood had tried to destroy. Behind them, nearly 30 people had gathered, men and women and children, all of them terrified, but all of them refusing to back down. Jem stood at her side, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Tommy was there too, his young face set with determination. Even Sam Blue Feather had come along with a dozen other hands from ranches across the valley. They watched as Blackwood's carriage approached, flanked by 8 armed men. "This is insane," Miller muttered. "He's got guns. We're going to get killed." "He's got guns," Margaret agreed. "But we've got something better." "What's that?" "The truth." Blackwood stepped down from his carriage with the easy confidence of a man who'd never lost a fight. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that swept across the assembled crowd with contempt. "Well, well," his voice carried across the snow. "I see the rabble has gathered. How touching." "Mr. Blackwood." Margaret stepped forward. "I'm Margaret Hollister." "I know who you are, the mail-order bride who thinks she's clever." Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're wasting your time, Mrs. Hollister. These people owe me money, and I've come to collect." "Actually, they don't owe you anything." "Excuse me." Margaret pulled a sheaf of papers from inside her coat. "These are the original mortgage documents for every property you claim to own. Every single one contains a clause requiring borrower consent for any transfer of the debt. You never obtained that consent, which means the transfers are invalid, which means you don't own these mortgages and you have no legal right to foreclose on any of these properties." Blackwood's smile faltered. "That's absurd." "Is it? I've already sent copies of these documents to the territorial governor's office, along with a detailed explanation of your scheme." Margaret held up an envelope. "I also have sworn statements from every rancher here attesting that they never consented to any transfer. And I have a letter from a lawyer in Silver Creek confirming that under territorial law, these foreclosures cannot proceed." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Margaret met his eyes without flinching. "There's an easy way to find out. Send your men to take these properties. See what happens when the territorial marshal shows up with a court order to stop you." The silence stretched out heavy and dangerous. Blackwood's face had gone red with fury, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Margaret could see him calculating, weighing his options, trying to find a way out of the trap she'd built. "This isn't over," he said finally. "I think it is." "You think you've won? You think a pile of papers is going to stop me? I own this valley. I own the bank, the stores, the law itself. You can't fight me with legal tricks and—" "Mr. Blackwood." Jem's voice cut through like a blade. "I think you should leave now." Blackwood turned to him with a sneer. And who's going to make me? You, the pathetic rancher who couldn't keep his first wife alive. Margaret felt Jem go rigid beside her. She reached for his hand and found it trembling. Don't, she whispered. He's trying to provoke you. He's succeeding. Jem, look at me. She waited until his gray eyes met hers. We've already won. Don't give him the satisfaction. For a long, terrible moment, she thought Jem was going to draw his pistol anyway. Then he let out a slow breath and his hand relaxed. You heard my wife, he said quietly. Leave. Now. Blackwood looked around at the assembled ranchers, at the faces set with determination, at the wall of humanity standing against him. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered in his cold eyes. This isn't over, he repeated. But his voice had lost its conviction. He climbed back into his carriage and signaled his men. They rode away without looking back, and the valley erupted in cheers. Margaret found herself swept up in a chaos of handshakes and hugs, of tearful thanks and incredulous laughter. Henry Thompson lifted her clean off the ground. Martha Thompson kissed her cheek. Children danced in the snow, and grown men wept with relief. Through it all, she kept her eyes on Jem. He stood apart from the celebration, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. She pushed through the crowd to reach him. Hey yourself. He pulled her close. You were incredible. I was terrified. Didn't show. She laughed, remembering when he'd said the same thing to her about that auction platform so many weeks ago. I learned from watching someone refuse to give up. Margaret. I know. She pressed her forehead to his. I know. Me too. They stood there in the snow, surrounded by celebrating ranchers, and for the first time since William died, Margaret let herself believe that everything was going to be all right. She was wrong, of course. The real fight was just beginning. The celebration lasted until well past dark, with families sharing food and stories around bonfires that dotted the Thompson property like fallen stars. Children ran laughing through the snow, while their parents talked in low, hopeful voices about futures that had seemed impossible just hours before. But Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the road that led back toward town. Blackwood had left too easily. A man like that didn't just accept defeat and walk away. He regrouped. He planned. He struck when you least expected it. You're thinking too hard. She turned to find Jem beside her 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and she took it gratefully. Someone has to. Not tonight. Tonight we won. Let yourself feel it. I'll feel it when Blackwood is truly finished. Right now, all we've done is delay him. Jem was quiet for a moment. You know, most people would be dancing right now, celebrating with the others. I'm not most people. No. He smiled slightly. You're not. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebrations. Tommy had found some boys his age from the Miller Ranch and was engaged in what looked like a snowball war. Sarah was helping Martha Thompson serve food, her face flushed with purpose. Emily and Ben sat together near one of the fires, Grace asleep in Emily's lap. They look happy, Margaret said quietly. They are happy. First time in a long while, I'd wager. Jem. I know. He set down his coffee and took her hands. I know you're worried. I know you can't stop thinking about what comes next. But right now, in this moment, your children are safe and warm and surrounded by people who care about them. That's worth something. It's worth everything. Then stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow and be here, with them, with me. Margaret looked into his gray eyes and saw something she hadn't expected to find when she'd stepped onto that auction platform all those months ago. She saw home. All right, she said. Just for tonight. They walked back toward the fires together, and for a few precious hours, Margaret let herself believe that the worst was over. She was wrong. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Margaret was going over the ranch accounts when Tommy burst through the cabin door, his face pale with shock. "Ma, you need to come see this." "See what?" "The cattle. Something's wrong with the cattle." She followed him to the pasture, Jem close behind. What she saw made her stomach drop. A dozen of their cattle lay dead in the snow. The rest of the herd stood clustered at the far end of the enclosure, lowing miserably, refusing to come near the carcasses. "What happened?" Margaret whispered. Jem knelt beside one of the dead animals, examining it with grim expertise. "Poisoned. Someone put something in the water trough. Blackwood. Has to be." Jem stood his jaw tight with fury. "He can't take our land legally, so he's going to destroy it instead." Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Those cattle were their livelihood. Without them, they couldn't pay the bank. Without them, they'd lose everything. How many did we lose? 12. Maybe more if whatever they used is still in the water. Can we prove it was Blackwood? Does it matter? He owns the sheriff. He owns the judge. We could have a written confession and it wouldn't make a difference. Tommy stood watching his young face hard. "So, what do we do?" Margaret looked at her son, at the man he was becoming, at the fear he was trying so hard to hide. She looked at Jem, exhausted and angry and ready to fight. She looked at the dead cattle lying in the snow, and she made a decision. "We don't give up," she said. "That's what Blackwood wants. He wants us scared and hopeless. He wants us to quit." She straightened her spine. "We're not going to quit. Margaret, we just lost a third of our herd. I know. And we'll find a way to survive anyway. We'll work harder. We'll sell what we can at Silver Creek. We'll take odd jobs, pool resources with the other ranchers, do whatever it takes." "That's not going to be enough." "Then we'll make it enough." She met his eyes. "You asked me once if I was willing to fight. I told you I was. Did you think I only meant when it was easy?" Jem stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, resignation giving way to determination. "All right, we fight." "We fight," Tommy echoed, and his voice was steady. The next weeks were brutal. Margaret worked from before dawn until long past dark, doing the jobs of 3 people while somehow keeping her children fed and the household running. She learned to mend fences and check on cattle and haul water from the creek when the well froze. Her hands blistered and bled and blistered again. Her back ached constantly. She fell asleep at the table more nights than not, too exhausted to even make it to bed. But she didn't complain. Not once. Neither did Jem. He pushed himself even harder, taking on the most dangerous and demanding work himself, trying to spare Margaret and the children. He rode out in storms to check on the herd. He cut firewood until his shoulders screamed. He did the work of 10 men with nothing but grim determination and the occasional encouraging glance at his wife, because that's what she was now. His wife. Not in name only, not just on paper, but in truth. They'd started sharing the bedroom 2 weeks ago, and if the children noticed, they didn't comment. Some things didn't need to be said aloud. "You're going to kill yourself," Margaret told him one night as she bandaged a cut on his hand. "You can't keep working like this. Neither can you. I'm tougher than I look." "I know." He flexed his fingers experimentally. "I've never met anyone tougher. Flatterer. Truth-teller." He caught her hand before she could pull away. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I love you." The words hung in the air between them. They'd been dancing around them for weeks, expressing the feeling in 100 small ways without ever speaking it directly. "I love you too," she said quietly. "I should have told you sooner." "You're telling me now?" "I was scared." He laughed shortly. "Big, tough rancher scared of 3 little words." "There's nothing little about those words." Margaret cupped his face in her hands. "Jeremiah Hollister, I married you because I had no choice. I'm staying with you because I do. Whatever happens next, Whatever Blackwood throws at us, I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. He kissed her, then gentle and fierce all at once, and Margaret felt something click into place inside her. Something that had been broken for so long, she'd forgotten it could be fixed. The attack came a week later. Margaret was alone in the cabin with Grace and Emily when she heard the horses. Too many horses coming too fast. She grabbed the rifle from above the door and pushed the girls toward the bedroom. Stay hidden. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Mama, go! She positioned herself by the window, heart pounding as 6 riders came into view. They weren't wearing masks, weren't trying to hide their identities. Why would they? In Blackwood's Valley, there was no one to report them to. Mrs. Hollister. The leader's voice carried across the snow. We just want to talk. Then talk from there. Now that's not very friendly. Mr. Blackwood sent us with a message. I'm not interested in messages from Mr. Blackwood. You should be. The rider smiled, and there was nothing pleasant in it. He says you've got 2 choices. Pack up your family and leave this territory within the week, and he'll forgive all your debts. Or stay and watch everything you care about burn. Margaret's finger tightened on the trigger. You tell Mr. Blackwood that I've faced harder men than him. You tell him this is my home and I'm not leaving. That's unfortunate. For your children, I mean. Ice flooded Margaret's veins. You threaten my children and I'll put a bullet between your eyes before you can blink. Easy now. The rider raised his hands in mock surrender. We're just messengers, but I'd think carefully if I were you. Accidents happen out here. People get hurt, children especially. He turned his horse and rode away, the others following. Margaret watched until they were out of sight, then sagged against the wall, her whole body shaking. Mama! Emily's small voice came from the bedroom doorway. Are they gone? They're gone, sweetheart. Were they bad men? Yes. Margaret set down the rifle and gathered her daughters close. But we're not going to let them scare us. Do you understand? We're not going to run. Grace looked up at her with solemn eyes. Because Hollisters don't run. Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. Grace had never called herself a Hollister before. That's right, baby. Hollisters don't run. When Jem came home that evening with Tommy and the older children, Margaret told him what had happened. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. They threatened the children. Not directly, but the implication was clear. I'll kill him. Jem's voice was flat, deadly. I'll ride into town tonight and put a bullet in his head. And then what? His men kill you. The sheriff arrests me. The children end up in an orphanage. Margaret grabbed his arm. Think, Jem. He wants you to react with violence. He wants an excuse to destroy us completely. Then what am I supposed to do? Just wait for him to make good on his threats? No. We get smarter. We gather more evidence. We find a way to bring him down legally. Legal. Jem laughed bitterly. He owns the law, Margaret. You said it yourself. He owns the local law. But there's a territorial governor, federal marshals, people who don't owe Blackwood anything. Margaret's mind was racing. The documents I found about the mortgage transfers, that's just the beginning. A man like Blackwood with that much power, that much arrogance, he's made mistakes. We just have to find them. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Tommy stepped forward. I want to help. Tommy? No, Ma. I'm serious. Those men threatened my sisters. My little sisters. His hands were clenched into fists. I'm done sitting on the sidelines. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Margaret looked at her son, this boy, who'd been so angry, so closed off, so determined to hate the world that had taken his father. She saw William in the set of his jaw, in the fire in his eyes. But she also saw something new. Something that belonged only to Tommy. She saw a man ready to fight for his family. All right, she said. You want to help? Then help me think. Blackwood's been building his empire for years. There have to be records somewhere. Ledgers, contracts, correspondence. Things he wouldn't want anyone to see. Where would he keep them? His house, probably. Maybe an office in town. Sam Blue Feather, who'd arrived for dinner and stayed when he heard the news, spoke up from his spot by the fire. There's a safe in Blackwood's study. I've seen it. Iron thing built into the wall. How do you know that? Jem asked. I worked for him, years ago before I knew what he really was. Used to do odd jobs around his property. Sam's dark eyes glittered. I also know that he keeps the key on a chain around his neck, never takes it off. So we'd need to get the key and get into his house, Margaret said slowly. Without being seen, without getting caught. That's impossible, Jem said. Nothing's impossible. Margaret turned to Sam. How well do you know that house? Sam smiled. Well enough. They spent the next 3 days planning. Sam sketched layouts of Blackwood's mansion from memory, marking guard positions and patrol routes. Margaret calculated timing and contingencies. Jem argued against the whole thing, then grudgingly started helping when he realized she was going to do it with or without him. This is insane, he said for the 100th time. If you get caught, I won't get caught. If you get caught, Blackwood will have you arrested. Or worse. I know the risks. Do you really? Jem grabbed her shoulders. Margaret, I can't lose you. I can't. These past months you've become everything to me. The thought of something happening to you. Nothing's going to happen to me. You can't promise that. No, I can't. She covered his hands with hers. But I can promise that if I don't do this, Blackwood wins. He takes our home, our land, our future. Is that what you want? Of course not. Then let me fight, the way I know how. Jem closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the fear was still there, but so was resignation. I'm going with you. No, you need to stay with the children. If something goes wrong, I'm not letting you face it alone. His voice was firm. We're partners, remember. That means we take risks together. Margaret wanted to argue, but looking into his eyes, she knew she'd never win this fight. All right. Together. Together. The night of the raid was cold and moonless. Margaret and Jem left the children with Sam, who promised to guard them with his life. Sarah was in charge of the younger ones with Tommy as backup. They were terrified. Margaret could see it in their eyes, but they were trying to be brave. Come back to us, Sarah said, hugging her mother tightly. I will, sweetheart, I promise. And bring that man down, Tommy added. Make him pay for what he did to our cattle, for threatening the girls. We will. They rode through the darkness, arriving at the outskirts of Blackwood's property just before midnight. The mansion loomed in the distance, lights glowing in a few windows. The study's on the east side, Jem whispered. Second floor. I know, Sam showed me. There's a guard at the back door, another one doing rounds. I know that too. Jem caught her hand. Margaret, if anything feels wrong, then we get out. I know. She squeezed his fingers. I'm scared too. But we've come too far to turn back now. They moved through the grounds like shadows, using the darkness and the terrain to hide their approach. Margaret's heart pounded so loud, she was sure the guards would hear it. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of fabric, seemed like a thunderclap. But they made it to the study window without incident. Jem boosted her up, and she slid the window open. Sam had told them it was never locked and crawled inside. The room was dark, but she could make out shapes, a desk, bookshelves, and in the corner the safe. She moved toward it, her hands shaking as she pulled out the tools Sam had given her. He'd taught her how to pick a lock, but she'd never done it under pressure. Never done it when getting caught meant, don't move. Margaret froze. A lamp flared to life, and she found herself staring at Barrett Blackwood himself, a pistol in his hand, and a cold smile on his face. Mrs. Hollister, I've been expecting you. Behind her, she heard the window slam shut, heard Jem's muffled curse, heard the sound of more men surrounding the house cutting off escape. You didn't really think I wouldn't know, did you? Blackwood stepped closer. I've had men watching your ranch for weeks. When Blue Feather started asking questions about my house, I knew exactly what you were planning. Margaret's mind raced. If you knew why, let me get this far. Because I wanted to catch you in the act. Breaking and entering attempted theft, that's a hanging offense in this territory. His smile widened. By tomorrow morning, you'll be in jail. By next week, you'll be on trial. And by the end of the month, your husband will be homeless, and your children will be wards of the state. You'll never get away with this. I already have. Blackwood cocked his pistol. Now are you going to come quietly, or do I have to shoot you and claim self-defense? Margaret looked at the gun, at Blackwood's cold eyes, at the door behind him where she could hear footsteps approaching. She thought about her children waiting at home, about Jem outside probably already captured, about everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, all of it slipping away. And then she heard a sound that made no sense. Horses. Dozens of horses thundering into the property. Shouts and gunfire and chaos erupting outside. Blackwood's smile faltered. What? The door burst open, and Sam Blue Feather stood there flanked by half the ranchers in the valley. Sorry we're late, Sam said. Had to round up reinforcements. Blackwood spun toward the new threat, and Margaret moved. She dove for his gun hand, knocking the pistol away. It discharged into the ceiling as they fell together struggling. She heard Jem's voice shouting her name, felt hands pulling her away from Blackwood, saw the look of disbelief on his face as he was surrounded by the very people he'd tried to destroy. You can't do this, Blackwood snarled. I own this town. You don't own anything anymore. Henry Thompson stepped forward with a sheaf of papers. These are the documents Mrs. Hollister was looking for. Found them in your desk while you were busy gloating. He smiled grimly. Turns out you've been embezzling from your own bank for years. Forging documents, bribing officials. There's enough here to put you away for the rest of your life. Blackwood's face went white. Those are lies, fabrications. Then you won't mind explaining them to the federal marshal who's on his way from Helena. Thompson nodded to two of his sons. Take him. Lock him in his own wine cellar until the marshal arrives. They dragged Blackwood away, his protests echoing through the mansion. Margaret stood in the middle of the study, shaking with relief and residual terror. Then, Jem was there, pulling her into his arms. You scared me half to death. I scared myself half to death. Is it over? Is it really over? Margaret looked at the documents Thompson was gathering at the ranchers filling the room at the shattered remains of Blackwood's empire. It's over, she said. We won. And this time, she knew it was true. The federal marshal arrived 3 days later. His name was Thomas Garrett, a stern man with a thick mustache and eyes that had seen every kind of corruption the frontier could offer. He spent 2 days going through the documents Margaret had found, interviewing witnesses, and building a case that would stand up in any court in the territory. Mrs. Hollister. He found her on the porch of the ranch, watching the children play in the melting snow. I wanted to thank you personally. For what? For doing what a dozen lawmen couldn't manage in 10 years. Garrett shook his head. Blackwood had everyone fooled. Paid off judges, bribed officials, buried anyone who tried to investigate him. But you, a mail-order bride from Philadelphia, you brought him down in 3 months. I had help. You had courage. That's rarer than help. He tipped his hat. The territorial governor sends his regards. He's canceling all the debts Blackwood acquired illegally and returning the properties to their rightful owners. Your ranch is free and clear. Margaret felt her knees go weak. Free and clear. Not a penny owed. Consider it compensation for everything you went through. After he left, Margaret sat on the porch steps and cried. Jem found her there a few minutes later. He didn't ask what was wrong. he just sat down beside her and waited. "We're free," she said finally. "No more debt, no more Blackwood. We actually did it. You did it. We did it, all of us." She wiped her eyes. "I keep waiting to wake up, waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing's going to go wrong. You don't know that." "No." He took her hand. "But I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it together. That's enough for me." Margaret leaned against his shoulder. "Jeremiah Hollister, when I stepped onto that auction platform, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel safe or happy or hopeful again. And now I have a home, a family, a husband who rode through a blizzard to save my son." She looked up at him. "I have everything I never knew I wanted." "So do I." He kissed her forehead. "So do I." Spring came to the valley like a blessing. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers that painted the hillsides in colors so bright they seemed unreal. The cattle that had survived the winter grew fat on fresh pasture. The creek ran high and clear, and the irrigation channels Jem had been planning for years finally seemed possible. Margaret threw herself into the work of rebuilding. She reorganized the ranch finances, found new buyers for their cattle, negotiated better prices for supplies now that Blackwood's stranglehold on the local economy was broken. She worked alongside Jem in the fields, learning to plant and tend and harvest her city-soft hands, growing calloused and strong. The children thrived in ways that amazed her. Tommy had become Jem's shadow, following him everywhere, learning everything he could about ranching. The anger that had defined him for so long had faded, replaced by purpose and pride. He still missed his father. Margaret could see it in his eyes sometimes, but he'd stopped fighting the world and started building something instead. Sarah had blossomed into a young woman almost overnight. She'd taken over the household management with quiet efficiency, freeing Margaret to focus on the ranch's finances. She'd also caught the eye of the new deputy marshal's son, a development that made Margaret feel old and proud and terrified all at once. Emily had finally stopped crying at night. She'd made friends with children from the neighboring ranches, and her laughter filled the cabin in a way it never had before. She'd started calling Jem Pa without thinking about it, and the first time it happened, Margaret saw him turn away to hide the tears in his eyes. Ben had recovered completely from his pneumonia, growing strong and wild and fearless. He spent his days exploring the property with the energy of a boy who'd been given a second chance at life and was determined not to waste a moment of it. And Grace. Little Grace, who'd been so sick and scared when they first arrived, had become the heart of the family. She followed her siblings everywhere, mimicked everything they did, and had somehow decided that Jem was the greatest person in the entire world. She demanded stories from him every night, climbed into his lap without asking, and called him my Jem in a way that made everyone laugh. "She's got you wrapped around her finger," Margaret observed one evening, watching Jem carry Grace to bed for the third time after she'd snuck back out. "Can't imagine what you mean." "You're terrible at pretending." "Never claimed otherwise." He tucked Grace in firmly and pointed a warning finger. "Stay. Sleep. I mean it this time." "One more story." "No." "Please." "Grace Elizabeth." "Pretty please?" Jem sighed, sat down on the edge of the bed, and launched into a story about a princess who lived in a castle made of clouds. Margaret watched from the doorway, her heart so full it hurt. This was her family, this strange, beautiful patchwork family that had been stitched together from desperation and hope and stubborn refusal to give up. She wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. The wedding was Sam Bluefeather's idea. "You need to do it properly," he said one afternoon as they worked on mending fences. "The two of you. Stand up in front of everyone and choose each other for real." "We already chose each other," Jem pointed out. "At an auction, under duress. That doesn't count." Sam drove a post into the ground with more force than necessary. "You love her. She loves you. The whole valley knows it. Make it official." "It is official. We're legally married." Paper marriage. Law marriage. Sam shook his head. Not heart marriage. Not yet. Jem was quiet for a long moment. You really think it matters? I think it matters to her, even if she won't say so. That night, Jem found Margaret at the kitchen table going over accounts as usual. He sat down across from her and waited until she looked up. What is it? Marry me. She blinked. We're already married. I know, but the first time... He struggled for words. The first time was about survival, about desperation. I want to do it again, properly, standing up in front of everyone saying the words because we mean them, not because we have to. Margaret set down her pen. Jeremiah Hollister, are you proposing to me? I reckon I am. You reckon? I know I am. He reached across the table and took her hands. Margaret Ellen Sinclair Hollister, will you marry me again, for real this time? Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The wedding was held on the first Sunday in May. The whole valley came. Every rancher Blackwood had tried to destroy every family who'd stood together against him, every person who'd watched Margaret and Jem fight for their future and been inspired by it. Martha Thompson organized the food. Sam Blue Feather provided music on a fiddle no one knew he could play. The new bank manager, an honest man from Helena who'd been brought in after Blackwood's arrest, donated the lumber for a temporary platform. Margaret wore a dress she'd made herself stitched from fabric the Valley women had gifted her. It wasn't fancy, wasn't anything like the silk gown she'd worn at her first wedding in Philadelphia, but it was hers made by her own hands, and that made it beautiful. Jem wore his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to the auction that day. He'd cleaned it up, mended the fraying cuffs, polished his boots until they shone. He looked terrified. You're shaking, Margaret observed as they took their places before Father McKenna, the circuit preacher who'd ridden 2 days to perform the ceremony. So are you. Fair point. The ceremony was simple. Father McKenna spoke about love and commitment and the courage to build something new from the ashes of the old. He spoke about family, not just the family you were born into, but the family you chose. When it came time for vows, Jem cleared his throat and spoke first. Margaret, I spent 4 years thinking I'd never feel anything again. I'd lost Ruth, lost my child, lost my will to live. I was just going through the motions, waiting to die. His voice cracked. Then I saw you on that auction platform. This woman with 5 children standing alone against the whole world, refusing to break. And something in me woke up. He took her hands. You taught me how to hope again, how to fight again, how to love again. His gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't have much to offer you. A rundown ranch, a stubborn streak, and a heart that's been broken and healed and is stronger for it. But everything I have, everything I am, belongs to you, for the rest of my life. Margaret had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She broke that promise almost immediately. Jeremiah, I stood on that platform thinking my life was over. I had 5 children, no money, and no hope. I was ready to give up. She squeezed his hands. Then you stepped forward. You spent your last dollar on a stranger because you saw something in her worth saving. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, a family when I'd lost everything, a future when I couldn't see past the next day. She took a shaky breath. You rode through a blizzard to save my son. You fought beside me against Blackwood. You loved my children like they were your own, and you loved me even when I was too scared to love you back. Her voice steadied. I spent my first marriage trying to be what someone else wanted. I'm spending this one being exactly who I am, because you make me feel like that's enough, more than enough. Father McKenna smiled. I believe that's the part where I pronounce you man and wife. Again. Again, Margaret agreed. You may kiss your bride. Jem pulled her close and kissed her, and the valley erupted in cheers. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was food and music and dancing under the stars. The children ran wild with their friends, stuffing themselves with cake and causing the kind of chaos that only happy children can create. Margaret danced with Jem then, with Sam, then with Henry Thompson and a dozen other ranchers who wanted to congratulate her. She danced with Tommy, who'd grown so tall she barely recognized him. She danced with Sarah, who whispered that the deputy's son had asked to court her. She even danced with Ben and Emily together, the three of them stumbling and laughing until they collapsed in a heap. "Mama," Grace tugged at her skirt. "Can I dance too?" "Of course, sweetheart." She scooped up her youngest daughter and swayed to the music. Grace's small arms wrapped around her neck. "Mama, are we going to live here forever?" "That's the plan. And Jem is going to be our papa forever." "Yes, baby, forever." "Good," Grace yawned. "I like it here. I like having a papa again." Margaret held her daughter close and felt tears slip down her cheeks. For so long she'd carried the weight of everything alone. The fear, the desperation, the endless fight to keep her children fed and safe. She'd convinced herself that she didn't need anyone, couldn't trust anyone, would never find someone willing to share the burden. She'd been wrong. Later, after the children had been put to bed and the guests had gone home, Margaret and Jem stood on the porch together, looking out at the land that was finally truly theirs. "Happy?" Jem asked. "Beyond words." "Same." He slipped an arm around her waist. "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "That auction. The way those men laughed when they saw you had 5 children. The way they called you worthless, said no one would ever want you. I try not to think about that. I think about it all the time, because they were so wrong." He turned her to face him. "You're the most valuable thing I've ever found, Margaret. You and those children. You're worth more than every head of cattle in this territory, more than every acre of land, more than anything I could ever buy or build or own. Jem, I spent my last dollar on you, and I'd do it again, 100 times, 1,000 times." His voice was fierce. "You're not worthless. You never were. Anyone who couldn't see that is a fool." Margaret kissed him long and deep, trying to pour everything she felt into that single moment. "Take me to bed," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch flourished under their combined management. Margaret's head for numbers and Jem's knowledge of the land proved to be an unbeatable combination. They expanded the herd, improved the property, built additions onto the cabin until it was a proper house. Within 5 years, they were one of the most prosperous ranches in the valley. The children grew up strong and capable and loved. Tommy became a rancher in his own right, eventually taking over a parcel of land that Jem gifted him on his 21st birthday. He married a girl from Silver Creek and had 3 children of his own, all of whom called Margaret Grandma and Jem Grandpa without a moment's hesitation. Sarah married the deputy's son, just as Margaret had feared and hoped. They moved to Helena, where he became a federal marshal, and she became known for her charity work and sharp business sense. She visited every summer, bringing her growing family and stories of city life that made her younger siblings roll their eyes. Emily discovered a talent for teaching and opened a small school on the ranch property, educating children from all over the valley. She never married, but she was never lonely. Her students and their families filled her life with purpose and joy. Ben became the adventurer of the family, traveling west to California and sending back letters full of wild stories about gold miners and railroad barons. He eventually settled in San Francisco, where he made a fortune in shipping and never forgot where he came from. And Grace, little Grace, who'd been so small and sick when they first arrived, grew into a woman as fierce and determined as her mother. She took over the ranch when Jem's health began to fail, running it with the same combination of sharp intelligence and stubborn will that Margaret had used to build it. Through it all, Margaret and Jem stayed together. They fought, sometimes argued about money and children, and the 1,000 small decisions that make up a life. But they always made up. Always found their way back to each other. Always remembered what they'd built from nothing and how far they'd come. On their 10th anniversary, Jem gave Margaret a gift. It was a locket, silver and beautiful, crafted by a jeweler in Helena. Inside were two things, a tiny portrait of their family and a single silver coin. "Is that the last dollar I spent at that auction?" Jem's voice was rough with emotion. "I kept it all these years. Figured it was the most important dollar I ever spent." Margaret pressed the locket to her heart. "This was our beginning. This was our everything." She kissed him, tasting tears, hers or his, she couldn't tell. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when no one else would, for spending your last dollar on hope. Thank you for being worth every penny, and then some." They stood together in the doorway of the house they'd built, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, listening to the sounds of a family that had grown from desperation into something beautiful. "No regrets?" Jem asked. "Not a single one. Not even that first night, when you thought you'd made the worst mistake of your life. Especially not that night. That was the night I started to see what you really were." "And what was that?" Margaret smiled. "Home." The years continued to pass, and eventually they both grew old. Jem went first peacefully in his sleep, with Margaret holding his hand. He was 72 years old and had spent nearly 4 decades building a life he never expected to have. Margaret found him in the morning, already gone, his face peaceful. She sat beside him for a long time, holding his cold hand, remembering everything they'd been through together. The blizzard, Ben's illness, Blackwood's threats, the night they finally admitted they loved each other, the wedding under the stars, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who'd filled their lives with chaos and joy. "I'll see you soon," she whispered. "Wait for me." She lived another 3 years, long enough to see Tommy's grandson born, long enough to hold Grace's first child, long enough to write down their story so future generations would remember. On her last night, she gathered her family around her and told the tale one final time. "Your grandfather spent his last dollar on me," she said, her voice thin but steady. "At an auction where no one else would bid. I had 5 children and no hope, and nothing to offer him but trouble. But he saw something in me worth saving." "What did he see, Grandma?" one of the little ones asked. "He saw someone who refused to give up, someone who kept standing even when everything was falling apart." Margaret smiled. "He taught me that's the most valuable thing a person can be. Not rich, not powerful, just someone who keeps trying no matter what." She closed her eyes. "We built this family from nothing, from one desperate bid at an auction, and the courage to believe we deserved better. Remember that. When things get hard, when it feels like the whole world is against you, remember that your great-grandmother was once a widow with 5 children, standing alone, with nothing but her own stubborn will to keep her going." "And then Grandpa saved you," Grace's daughter said. "No, sweetheart, we saved each other." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper now. "That's what love does. It doesn't just save one person. It saves everyone who's brave enough to reach for it." She died that night, surrounded by 4 generations of the family she and Jem had built together. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch where the sun rose every morning and painted the valley in gold. The headstone read simply, "Margaret and Jeremiah Hollister." They kept standing. And years later, when people passed through that valley and asked about the prosperous ranch with the big family, locals would tell them the story. About a widow with 5 children that no one wanted. About a broken cowboy who spent his last dollar on hope. About the winter that nearly killed them and the love that saved them both. About 2 people who refused to give up no matter what the world threw at them. The story always ended the same way. They didn't just survive. They built an empire of love, a legacy of courage, a family that would last for generations. And it all started with one man stepping forward when everyone else stepped back. One desperate bid. One impossible hope. One choice that changed everything. Some people spend their whole lives looking for that kind of love, the kind that sees you at your worst and believes you're worth saving anyway. Margaret and Jem found it in the most unlikely place, and they held on to it until the very end. That's the truth of it. That's the whole story. Love isn't about perfect circumstances or easy roads. It's about two people who refuse to let go of each other no matter how hard the storm. It's about choosing hope when despair would be easier. It's about building something beautiful from broken pieces. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about a cowboy with nothing left who looks at a woman the world has discarded and sees not what she lacks, but everything she could become. Margaret Sinclair arrived in Montana with 5 children and no future. She left behind a dynasty. And it all began with the simplest, bravest act of all. He saw her. He chose her. He never let go. That's what love is. That's what family is. That's what forever means.